Was July 4th, 1776 the most important moment in American history, or just one moment among many? Today on Across the Fence, we're going back in time to Fort Ticonderoga in December 1775, meeting up with a 25-year-old volunteer missing 2 fingers on his left hand, Henry Knox, and witnessing the start of one of the most consequential gambits of the Revolutionary War, the Noble Train of Artillery. It would end 300 miles away on March 17, 1776, the day the British were driven out of Boston. Hello, Vermont, and greetings from New York. I'm here at Fort Ticonderoga with Stuart Lilly, the fort's Vice President of Public History. Stuart, how's it going today?
I'm doing wonderfully.
All right, so let's go. It's December 1775. Set the stage for us.
So by this point, way back May 10th, 1775, Ethan Allen, Benedict Arnold, the Green Mountain Boys, they rushed on into Fort Ticonderoga. It's America's first victory. That's now been in American hands. The goal originally, of course, to kind of get cannons for the siege of Boston, a siege that began, that's kind of what's famous, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, April 19th, 1775. And the British have been hemmed up inside of Boston ever since. Through the summer of 1775, leading up to December, an American army assembled here at Ticonderoga, went down Lake Champlain, attacked British forts along the Richelieu River, captured them, made their way to Montreal, to Quebec City, and were outside of that city there. The cannons captured along the way, all shipped up back here. At the same time, everyone's watching their watches. Boy, this siege is really going on and on. Something's got to break this deadlock, because the cannons that are here from all of these places in the Champlain Valley and Richelieu still haven't got to Boston.
It's remarkable. How important was liberating Boston for the Americans?
Well, this is a kind of long-standing kind of irritant to the Americans. You know, Boston in its own way, you can think all the way back to the Boston Massacre back in 1770. This has been a touch point for political trouble. Going up to the aftermath of the Boston Tea Party, the whole city had been occupied, the whole colony of Massachusetts under martial law. So, you know, this predates the start of the war, this need to get British soldiers out of Boston. Once the war began, this is now the first American city that could be liberated.
So, Knox leaves Boston on November 16th, arrives at Fort Ticonderoga on December 5th. Is that about right? Okay. And I know you know exactly what happened next, because 250 years later, you reenacted the entire thing here at Fort Ticonderoga. So give us an overview. Tell us what happens when he gets to the fort.
So Henry Knox, he traveled by Lake George, beautiful Lake George. He descended that, arrived here at the fort by the end of the day on December 5th. As he arrived, he already had a whole bunch of cannons from these various captures to the north of us already stockpiled here. A fellow named General Philip Schuyler had been doing so. So Henry Knox, he kind of got to tour up and down all of these cannons up on blocks, pick out his favorites, and then from the next day all the way up to December 10th, he had the soldiers of the garrison. He paid them pretty well, to go ahead and load cannons onto wagons, take them first down to the water of Lake Champlain, because it wasn't frozen yet, go up the Lachute River, got onto another set of wagons, then up to Lake George, where he filled up 3 large vessels with 1 load, then embarked up the lake, sent the boats back to get the second load, and made preparations for the rest of the journey, at which point winter really set in.
Wow. I mean, it's pretty impressive, and what you did in December was equally impressive. Let's take a look.
Make ready! Take aim!
happened when the Noble train reached Boston?
So Henry Knox, as he got to Albany and then crossed Massachusetts, went up over the Berkshire Mountains, he had everything going along really well with the train of artillery. So he rode on ahead and actually arrived back to General Washington's quarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts, almost exactly a month after he had left way back in November. The cannons themselves, that's the cannons and mortars, 59 in total. By January 27th, they reached Framingham, Massachusetts. And when they arrived, none of them had the wheel part, the carriages. So the next step in the Noble train was to go ahead and outfit them. So for the next several weeks, skilled craftsmen of the Army called artificers, they worked to build the cannon carriages and the mortar beds so that they actually could be used. Then, Washington had to come up with a plan. Okay, I've got this great stuff. I want to drive the British out of Boston. What are we going to do? And there were a whole series of councils of war with Washington's generals where they finally came up with a plan where these cannons and mortars, most of them would be on the northwest side of Boston. Bombard the city so that other troops under Washington's command could go ahead out onto this unoccupied part or unoccupied hill sticking out next to Boston called Dorchester Neck, fortify that to get the British, who'd been kind of like, what are we doing here anyway, to be like, yeah, no, you have to go, that this is not an option.
Mm-hmm. Having done it yourself, right, having done the piece at Fort Ticonderoga yourself, under winter conditions, under the snow, working with oxen, etc., can you believe they pulled it off? I mean, you're a historian, so thinking back into the time, thinking under the conditions, how miraculous is it that they managed to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes this is cast as like, Henry Knox himself did it. And he did. He absolutely achieved something that's incredible, a great deal of initiative to pull it off. But he worked with a big team. He worked with Philip Schuyler, who commanded this entire northern department, this whole region of the Army. So there are a lot of times where Henry Knox would be like, this is what I want to do, and Philip Schuyler would be like, no, this is how we do this here. But it was also a much bigger team effort outside of the Continental Army, wherein, if you imagine, if you're a farmer along the Hudson River or along, the southern part of Massachusetts, like, you farm, you log, you do all these things all winter long because you still had to make a living. And the things that you had at your disposal, yokes of oxen, teams of horses, sleds to move these supplies around in winter, like, these guys knew what they were doing with them. And so Henry Knox, as long as he kind of did really good administrative work, riding out ahead of the column of sleds, ensuring that there were farmers and drivers showing up to do their sections, it's doable. Could it have gone awry at any point? Absolutely. But he didn't. He managed this really well.
Well, that had to have had something to do with the personality of Knox as well. So what was he like?
So Knox, we know he's an ambitious guy. I mean, he started out as kind of, average young man in Boston. Yeah, he's 25 when he arrived here on December 5th. He married up. His wife, Lucy Flucker, came from a very prominent, and his dad-in-law, actually a loyalist, happy to support the British Crown in Boston. Henry Knox had, kind of trained himself to know the things a gentleman knew. And he was a merchant, he ran his bookshop. Once the war began, Henry Knox set himself to work reading up on the things he needed, not simply to be a gentleman, but also to have the knowledge to be an engineer. And this is knowledge that you don't just get in English. It means reading all of your good French engineering sources. And he was someone, with relatively humble beginnings. By the time Washington gave him his orders, Henry Knox signed his name Esquire, which means like, I am a gentleman. So confidently, I'm going to sign my name with this every time.
Pretty cool. What do you think that we understand history differently when we see it reenacted? Because that's a real specialty of Fort Ticonderoga, is living history. Yeah,
I mean, there's some, when we think about history, ultimately it's an act of imagination. We're like, I think it probably looked like this. You go to the place where it was and see the movement of the train and the roads and all that. But the human element, what did it look like to see soldiers, in this spot? What was the kind of, scale and mass of oxen hauling this along? What did it sound like to hear the rumble of a wagon wheel as it went along the frozen ground? These sort of visceral details of the past, what inflect one's imagination about what these events might have looked like, we use these as educational tools here at Fort Ticonderoga.
That's amazing. And Fort Ticonderoga is going to continue to present all of these different moments in the entire story of the Revolutionary War all the way through 2027. Tell us about what's happening at the fort.
Yeah, so we're in the midst of a 4-year living history program that we call Real-Time Revolution. We went all the way back to 1774 on the eve of the war. Last year, 2025, looked at 1775, the capture of the fort, Henry Knox, obviously, and we'll go right on up into 2027, which is the campaigns of Saratoga and kind of Ticonderoga's last major act. And within this real-time revolution, it allows us to kind of peel back day by day the events that happened here. Events that are famous, like Henry Knox arriving, but also the kind of humble events. And also the experience of individual soldiers as they arrived and departed. And when we talk about kind of the grand details of history or big strategies or broad themes, what it felt like for the people actually here. And also, just like we're talking about Henry Knox, like the noble train might not have worked. There's countless moments throughout these years of our American Revolution into the Revolutionary War where things could have had vastly different outcomes.
Yeah, and it's such an amazing opportunity for people to watch it all come to life. There may never be a more important time than right now for us all to understand the American Revolution, what was at stake, and the vision of America that made it worth fighting for. Stuart Lilly, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
As always, Vermont, thank you for learning and exploring with me, and thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.